Good morning, and I'm Louise Shelley. I'm the director of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center. And I want to welcome you to this cross-cutting and innovative discussion on hubs of illicit trade, which addresses crime, convergence, and the enabling environment. And today's research is going to be focusing on our new research on illicit trade hubs in Dubai, Central America, and the tri-border area. This is part of what we are proud of doing at TRAC, which is conducting innovative research on issues of national security and human security. What we do is interdisciplinary work. We think of what we do as innovative, and we hope you will find today's discussion thoughtful and thought-provoking. The materials that are now being presented will subsequently be published, and we hope that you'll be staying with us as we continue our presentations on this and join our intellectually exciting research community. So with this, I turn the floor over to Jorge Lasmar, but we want you to remain on mute throughout all the presentations. As you're already doing, please introduce yourself and your organizations within the chat function, and you're welcome to submit questions through chat at any time. And Dr. Lasmar, who is joining us from Minas in Brazil, will be helping moderate the discussion and also presenting the questions to the audience. So with this, I want to turn the floor over to Dr. Jorge Lasmar, who has been a wonderful partner in this research with us, and we appreciate their insight and hard work and their networking talents in bringing a wonderful community to our presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shelley, for your very kind words. And I would like to welcome you all from all over the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So welcome all to our webinar on the hubs of illicit trade, crime convergence, and enabling environment, which is part of our ongoing Hubs of Illicit Trade project. Well, this webinar is hosted by the Anti-Illicit Trade Institute, the Terrorism, Transnational Crime Corruption Center, the TRAC at George Mason School of Policy and Government. So before we begin, I just would like to make a few reminds. So first, I would kindly ask all the participants to please be on mute for the duration of the event. I also would like to invite all the participants to submit your questions via the chat box. The Hubs of Illicit Trade project is a strategic evidence-based research initiative that was launched in June 22, and its key objective is to inform policymakers and communities on the interconnected harms and multiple compounding threats associated with key hubs of illicit trade. Its coverage includes various types of illicit trades, including the smuggling, trafficking of narcotics, weapons, human counterfeit and pirated goods, illegal tobacco and alcohol products, gold, and precious minerals. Its geographical focus lies on 4 well-known hubs of illicit trade, such as the tri-border area, Dubai, Central America, and Ukraine and Eastern Europe. So we have gathered today very distinguished and renowned specialists from across the globe. And today we're going to be joined by Dr. Rashmi Singh, who is an associate professor at Minas in Brazil, co-founder and co-director of the Research Network on Terrorism, Radicalization, Transnational Crime, TRAC, and coordinator of the Laboratory for Research and Projects International Relations, Minas. And also by Dr. Yulia Kirillova, which is a research scholar at TRAC, George Mason, and data analyst for the World Bank Group. Both of them will present the key findings and covering factors of the converging factors of the hubs of illicit trade, crime and convergence, and the enabling environment in both the three border area, the Central America and the Dubai hubs. We will also be joined by Daniel Rico, which is founder and general director of C Analysis, who will present a case study on the free trade zones and tobacco smuggling in Colombia. And finally, by Dr. Christian Viana de Azevedo, who is Undersecretary of Justice and Public Security for Intelligence, Joint Operations and Integrations from the Department of Justice and Public Security in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. He will discuss the crime-terror nexus in the three border areas with a few case studies about how the hub connects from South America to Africa and beyond, focusing on the nexus between drug trafficking and terrorism. After that, we will run the Q&A sessions. So without further delay, I would like to yield the floor to Dr. Rashmi Singh and Yulia Krylova.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yulia, would you like to start? Would you like me to start?
Yeah, sure, I can start. Next slide, Casey, please. So our project focuses on different types of smuggling and trafficking, and it focuses on 4 well-known hubs of illicit trade: the tri-border area, Dubai, Central America, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. And we would like to start our first webinar by discussing commonalities between different hubs in terms of crime convergence and enabling factors. However, these presentations includes only 3 hubs, the tri-border area, Dubai, and Central America, because the Russian invasion of Ukraine made it extremely difficult to conduct research in that area. However, we hope to include that region in our final report. And now, Rashmi will start with crime convergence. Next slide.
Thank you. Thanks, Yulia. Casey, could I please have the next slide? I'd like to start with presenting our first sets of findings. Our presentation has a very simple format. We're going to present what are our findings across the 3 hubs that we have already done research on, and we will try to provide the evidence and examples from specific areas as we move forward. So the first finding that we have is that we're seeing a very clear convergence of different types of smuggling routes and actors, and all the evidence that we have so far suggests that there are multiple illicit groups, goods, which are often using the same shipments, the same routes, and the same modus operandi is utilized by multiple actors. What is different, however, is the destination of the goods that is being smuggled. So to just elaborate on that, we see that specific illicit trades are using, or at least privileging, the use of specific modes and routes of transports, but there are crossovers between them. We do see 2 or more commodities often being shipped together, and there is a combination in many cases of legal and illegal goods that are shipped together in order to mask the smuggling that is going on in the same process. This entire process of smuggling is facilitated by an enabling environment of corruption, a very, very intricate web of customs officers, police, Navy officers who are bribed by the actors along the way. So as you can see in this particular graph, I've only showed the top 3 products of multiple illicit products that are brought into Brazil through these 9-10 routes. And what we can actually see are some very, very clear patterns. So we see common shipment combinations such as arms shipped with electronics, clothes, computer devices, and or with toys. We see large quantities of drugs, especially marijuana, in false bottomed trucks that are often used to trade legally traded wood and soybeans. Drugs are also transported along rivers and water channels, which are very difficult to monitor and control. We also see ports that are being used very clearly. Santos and Paranaguá are obviously the most famous in Brazil, but there are other ports that are coming up as increasingly important. We are also seeing how the ports are linking the Pacific to the Southern Atlantic, and this is facilitating another route. And the ports are actually very interesting because they are not only a very clear point of entry for specific illicit goods, so for instance, Chinese goods, but these are goods that are through the ports reaching the whole of Brazil. They are reaching through the tri-border area into Paraguay and beyond, as well as into Argentina. But we're also seeing the same thing happening in reverse. So we are seeing shipments of specifically drugs and other particular illicit goods making their way through specific Brazilian and other clean ports across Argentina, Uruguay, into Europe. And we're seeing especially, places like Antwerp and Rotterdam emerge as very significant ports in Europe. We're also seeing a variety of actors being involved here. So we are everything from the Brazilian PCC to local groups to regional players such as the Mexican-based Sinaloa cartel, the Naranjetas, as well as various terrorist groups and insurgent groups involved in these activities. So there's a lot of information here. This is a summary, and any questions, like I said, as we move forward, we hope to answer during the question answers. Julia, I'll pass this on to you.
Thank you. Next slide, Casey. Thank you. According to our next finding, on the recent increase in the number of international and national sanctions imposed on different countries, the role of hubs for sanctions evasion is becoming more and more prominent. For example, here you can see a sanctions evasion scheme which is based on a real case where Panama's customs officers detained a North Korean vessel, Chonchongang, which was transiting the Panama Canal on its way from Cuba to North Korea. The only declared cargo was sugar. However, customs officers found several containers with missile systems, arms, ammunition, and aircraft engines. And the investigation by the United Nations Security Council found that the actual operator of this vessel was a company that was linked to the North Korean government and to over 34 entities in over 11 countries, including Panama, Russia, and Brazil. All these entities were used to obscure the connection of this transaction to North Korea. For example, entities in Vladivostok and Russia were used to submit false declarations. A company in Singapore was used to pay voyage fees. Entities in Brazil were named as clients on invoices. This scheme illustrates the interconnectedness between different hubs, and it also illustrates the complicated nature of illicit trade transactions, which rely on multiple shell and front companies, often registered in offshore safe havens. And also they rely on multiple management and ownership levels, which are also very dynamic and changing all the time. Next slide, Casey. Our next finding is about the convergence of illicit trade and money laundering, which both rely on a wide range of financial and non-financial enablers, including banks, money transfer systems, such as Havala, dealers in precious metals, lawyers, finance companies, real estate agents, insurers, and accountants. Here on the slide, you can see two schemes which are also based on real cases. In the first scheme, black market peso exchange, drug cartels launder their money received from selling drugs in the United States by purchasing counterfeit goods, including in the Colón free zone in Panama and other free zones. Importantly, these counterfeit goods can be resold several times, and they can go through different free trade zones. And this circulation of counterfeit commodities allows smugglers to disguise the actual origin of their goods and also to change the value. The second example, e-Havala scheme, is also based on a real case where in 2018, the Indian police detained smugglers of gold from Dubai to Mumbai. And these smugglers used illicit currency transfers to support the illicit circulation of gold and money between Dubai and Mumbai. Specifically, they hired carriers to transport bank cards to Dubai. And later, these bank cards were used to buy more gold and more counterfeit goods to smuggle it back to Mumbai. Next slide. Now back to Rashmi.
Thanks. Our next findings suggest that there is a very clear convergence of illicit trade and terrorism. So what we're seeing is that the trade that is going through the hubs that we are researching are very clearly fueling conflict and high levels of violence, not only at the country level, but also at regional levels. We're also seeing a very clear and strong link between the proceeds of illicit trade as being used to finance terrorist organizations and armed groups. We're seeing how terrorist organizations, as facilitated by criminal organizations, are increasingly involved in activities that help them facilitate their strategic objectives. So through laundering money and so on and so forth. So in all the hubs, we are seeing some very clear trends in terms of crime. So we're seeing corruption, we're seeing contraband, we're seeing falsification, we're seeing money laundering, drug trafficking, trafficking in arms, tobacco, gold, people. These are some of the things that are coming up quite consistently. And what we are also noticing is how together this tends to generate a cyclical reciprocity where illegal goods are mostly falsified and used for smuggling, and then revenue from illicit activities are laundered to legalize the assets. And so what we're seeing is a feedback loop between the legal and illegal activities. We are also seeing across the hubs how the transnational criminal and terrorist activities are more or less following the same logic of this feedback. What we are also noticing, contraband and money laundering are standing out for providing the necessary conditions to criminal and terrorist groups to expand and intensify their other criminal actions. And so what we're seeing, as I've said before, is a range of different transnational actors, those engaged in arms, drug smuggling, terrorism, who are utilizing the same routes to transport money and other illicit goods. And so what we are seeing is how crimes are complementing one another and how illicit goods are regularly exchanged. So for example, drugs for weapons, with the result that different kinds of criminal activity benefit and support the other on the one hand and intersect with terrorism on the other. So these convergences are generating, as we can see in this particular graph that is dealing with rates of homicide within Brazil in general, as you can see from the orange line, and the rates of homicides that are in Paraná and Foz do Iguaçu, which is one of the main urban hubs of the tri-border area. And as you can see, the levels of crime and homicide in Foz do Iguaçu far outpaces that of the average in Brazil or even Paraná, which is the nearest state. So we are seeing that there is a very clear impact on the levels of violence. And we also know, for example, from our other hubs, that terrorist organizations have very clearly, for a very long time, benefited from things like drug trade and money laundering. We've had an example from the Central American hub for trade-based money laundering, where we documented, the FATF report documented a black market peso exchange case where the proceeds of cocaine sales by what was a Colombian drug network were sent to bank accounts that were linked to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So lots of connections, not only between criminal organizations and terrorist organizations, but across geographical zones. I think the next one, Julia, goes back to you.
Yeah, and next slide, please. We also found that free trade zones play a critical role in illicit trades, and illicit trade actors often exploit vulnerabilities of free trade zones, including weak procedures to inspect goods and the lack of adequate cooperation between zone and customs authorities. Our today's speaker, Daniel Rico, will tell us more about free trade zones in Central America, and I would like to give a couple more examples from Dubai. For example, a recent report by the United Nations Security Council found that the Sahel region in Africa continues to be flooded by illicit cigarettes from Dubai. And these cigarettes are transported from Jebel Ali port, the largest port in the Middle East, to local ports in Ghana, Benin, Togo, Burkina Faso, and then these illicit cigarettes are trafficked by trucks to other countries such as Mali and Niger, and some of them end up in Algeria, which is a large outflow market for illicit cigarettes destined for European countries, including France, Italy, and Spain. And according to a recent study, there are more than 100 different routes that smugglers use to transport illicit cigarettes from the UAE to Algeria. And most of the cigarettes are produced in the Jebel Ali free zone in Dubai, which has a large concentration of cigarette manufacturers. However, there is also strong evidence that the Jebel Ali free zone is also used as a hub for transshipments of illicit cigarettes from other countries, including Indonesia, Malaysia, North and South Korea. The second example below is also based on an investigation by the United Nations Security Council, which found the illicit trafficking of UAE armored personnel carriers in Libya. And the manufacturers of these armored carriers were also located in free trade zones in Dubai, including Dubai Industrial City and Dubai Investment Parks. Next slide. Transport infrastructure also plays a critical role in illicit trades. For example, many free trade zones are located near or within large airports and seaports, and huge air passenger traffic and huge volumes of containers going through ports make it's extremely difficult to identify suspicious shipments. For example, in 2020, the UAE ranked 7th in the world on container port throughput. In 2020, Brazil also ranked 7th in the world on the number of air passengers, with 45 million people traveling to and from Brazil. And another important fact is that Panama has the largest shipping fleet in the world, which exceeds the fleets of the United States and China combined. And as of this year, 22% of the global fleet carrying capacity was registered in Panama. And this is why Panama flagged vessels often appear in smuggling and trafficking cases. For example, on this picture, you can see a Panama flagged vessel participating in a ship-to-ship transfer of Venezuela's oil. In violation of the United Nations sanctions. Next slide. And financial infrastructure and deficiencies in anti-money laundering regulations make hubs particularly attractive for illicit trade actors. For example, this year, the UAE ranked 8th in the world on the Financial Secrecy Index. And the size of offshore financial services in the UAE was 22%, followed by Panama 19%, and Brazil 15%. And also Panama and the UAE are on the Financial Action Task Force gray list due to deficiencies in anti-money laundering regulations. However, on a positive note, both Panama and the UAE have recently made high-level political commitments to strengthen their anti-money laundering regulations. And also there has been some progress on regulations related to virtual assets, to beneficial owners, and also to regulations related to virtual assets in the UAE. Next slide. Okay, so we're on our last two findings, and I'll try to rush through this because we are pushing the limits of our time. So the next finding is corruption. Corruption is a very clear common feature across all our hubs, whether we're talking about national corruption with the state's participation in all corrupt activities that facilitate illicit flows on a transnational level, facilitate the functioning of organized crime syndicates. All our hubs are characterized by the presence of dirty cops, administrators, corrupt mayors, judiciary, parliamentarians, and sometimes even a full-fledged narco administration. Most of the hubs that we are researching, as you can see from the slide here,
score very, very poorly on the corruption index that is released by Transparency International. So I thought the best way forward here was a case study. And I'm actually going to skip through a lot of the details here due to time, but hopefully expand during question answers if required. This is a fairly well-known case study, and it's linked to the illicit tobacco trade. So some background here. This is essentially linked to the tri-border area, but it is rooted in the corruption that is in the tri-border area, and specifically in the country of Paraguay. Paraguay is a key driver in the illicit tobacco trade. It generates about 11% of the global illicit market. That's about 50 billion cigarettes. According to Euromonitor, in 2018, 68 billion cigarettes were produced in Paraguay. And this is interesting given that Paraguay's own domestic consumption is approximately 2 billion cigarettes a year. Paraguay also has one of the lowest tax rates in the world on the sale of cigarettes, which actually makes it very, very lucrative and very attractive for companies to establish manufacturing operations there. And so this gets us to the gentleman over here, who is Horacio Cartes, who was the former president of Paraguay, and he is a key player in the tri-border area's illicit tobacco trade, and is essentially the biggest producer of illicit tobacco in the region. He controls Paraguay's largest cigarette producer, Tabesa, which is a licensed cigarette manufacturer that is actually based in one of the towns in the tri-border area. They are producing the bulk of the illegal cigarettes that Paraguay produces. So the question is, what happens to these illicit cigarettes? Well, the majority of these illicit cigarettes are smuggled out of Paraguay for illegal sale in various other countries. We are seeing how Tabesa is responsible for just under 50% of the contraband tobacco that is sold in Brazil and Argentina. And this is interesting because Paraguay legally does not sell to Brazil. There are also research indicators showing Tabesa products linked to illicit trade in Guatemala, Mexico, Ecuador, Suriname, Venezuela, Panama, and Colombia. And we do see how about 80% of all of the money that is laundered in Paraguay has moved through a bank that has been owned by Cartes, which is Banco Amambe. Cartes has also been linked to Brazil's Lava Jato operation, although not directly, but through the investigative work that Polícia Federal, the federal police, has done on two individuals or two entities, essentially Banco Paulista and Dario Messer. And again, I will expand this if we have time during question answers. There are various other details that I can give you, but this is, I think, sufficient to give our audience an overview of how in-depth national level corruption actually facilitates illicit trade. Casey, could you give us our last slide, please? And this gets us to our last finding, which is essentially diasporic and transient populations and migrants. And this is linked to everything that we've said previously in terms of transport, financial infrastructure, crime-terror nexus that Dr. Viana Azevedo is going to talk about a little bit more. And so what we can see here is we have three main cities in the tri-border area. And that's the example that I will give you. Puerto Iguaçu in Argentina, Foz do Iguaçu in Brazil, Cidade del Este in Paraguay. And all of these are characterized, as you can see here, by a very, very heterogeneous ethnic composition. We also see how these three cities are geographically located in a very, very resource-rich area. It's an epicenter of the Guarani aquifer. The Itaipu Dam that was constructed between 74 and 84 has made this even more important as a region. But also we are seeing very clear similarities between these three urban regions. They're all economically dynamic urban areas that have experienced very accelerated rates of growth facilitated by this very diverse population. The fact that there has been this growth has attracted very large flows of migrants and illicit as well as licit commodities. The fact that you have this very heterogeneous population also facilitates remittances to and from the region, especially to countries like Lebanon. We're also seeing how all of this activity, both licit and illicit, is very firmly nestled and facilitated by weak institutions, widespread corruption. The entire economy of the region is buoyed by tourism, thanks to the natural wonder that is Foz do Iguaçu, and is further facilitated by the presence of two free trade zones, as Julia has already outlined the importance of. We are also seeing how all of this economic activity is facilitated by very, very impressive infrastructure of roads, airports, banks that connects this area that seems isolated, but is actually very, very deeply connected to the other countries across the Mercosur, as well as the rest of the world. Porous borders and this very mobile population makes monitoring and controlling all of this illegal activity even more challenging. And the last figures that you can see here, Puente de la Amistad, which is the bridge between Brazil and Paraguay, and Puente Tranquedo Neves, which is the bridge between Argentina and Brazil. These are the figures of people who cross that bridge per day. And I would like to point out that this is a drop in figures because of the COVID-19 pandemic. They were much higher 3 years ago. So this is just a brief outline of all of the findings that we've had across the three main hubs that we've done the research on. And these are the points of convergence that we have identified, along with the enabling environment that actually helps facilitate these convergences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, Dr. Krylova, for this very insightful overview of the cross-border criminal activity and the points of convergence. I now would like to pass on to Daniel Rico, who will present a case study on the free trade zones and tobacco smuggling in Colombia.
Hello, good morning to all. I just want to check first that you are hearing me and we're fine with the presentation. So if you can just let me know.
Yeah, it's great. I can hear you and see you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation, and good morning to all. It's a great honor to be part of this team and to share some of the experience and knowledge we have about smuggling and free trade zones in Colombia. So I have a very short period of time, so I will be happy and I can discuss this for a long time, but I'm just gonna give you the key issues of the research we have been conducting on free trade zones for the last probably 4 or 5 years. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So I have the temptation to stay in this slide for a long time, but I'm gonna make it as short as possible. Is like the first thing I want you to share with you is that we have a deep connection between drugs and contraband. I mean, it's not profitable to bring contraband if you don't have narcotics, and narcotics are also, the contraband component is crucial for the money flow of them. So in this graph, what I'm trying to show is just a short version of what we have learned in studying the Colombian cartels. I am a former member of the intelligence in the Colombian community. So what we learned is that pretty much like traffickers move cocaine to Central America, Mexico, to be sold in the United States. Pretty much they get paid in Mexico, but surprising, the money that they get in cash in Mexico, they move it to the United States, and they use the United States system as a financial system to send the money to China, especially and some specific areas of Hong Kong, in order to buy contraband. So that's one of the main findings, is how important is the U.S. financial system. We were expecting that they also do, but it's doing the transaction directly from Mexico to buy products in China. Then usually they used to bring the product to Panama, and what I mean product is cigarettes, cell phones, textiles, and shoes, I mean, you name it. And they bring it to Panama, and from Panama they bring it to Colombia. And that was true until before the pandemic and before the Panama Papers. But there is this last part of the route has changed significantly. So what I do with my team is that we follow the tracks of containers in free trade zones, and what we have observed is that these containers are not coming directly from Panama to Colombia as they used to, full with cigarettes. Now the containers are moving from Panama to the United States, especially to Texas, And in Texas, they changed the bill of lading and they go through other ports in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, and then they will came to Colombia. So just as a conclusion is how the market, so three conclusions from this is the United States is very important in both, in the financial component and the logistic component to transform cocaine money into contraband. And second, we have new players in this. And so the role of Panama has changed. And also the final step is from Colombia also become the hub for cigarette smuggling and especially from Colombia to Ecuador and in a minor portion to Peru. But the 90% of the cigarettes that are coming to Ecuador from illegal tobacco are coming from Colombia. So this is a long route in order to get to Ecuador. If we can move to the next slide, please. I'm sorry, this is in Spanish. I have the image, not the text, but I just want to share what idea is. This is a very profitable business. What we're trying to is to break how the profits and the margin is making in the process. This is in Colombian pesos, but the conclusion is like we have here a market of 700% profit. I mean, buying cigarettes in Hong Kong, Chinese and Korean cigarettes, and sell it in Colombia or Ecuador is a very profitable business. And so drug dealers has learned that money laundering or laundering the money is a cost, probably between 10, 15, or 20%. So contraband is something that multiply the criminal assets rather than to reduce it. Next one, please. I'm sorry, I'm speaking too fast, but I want to share a lot of things with you in each slide. So what we have done, I mean, our approach, our methodological approach, we use mixed methods analysis. First, we track all the data using the reports of free trade zone and customs in the Latin American region. And we also conduct interviews on prisons and authorities. We follow judicial case, and we follow in deep how the smuggling of cigarettes is occurring in the country. So some conclusions. I mean, this is an important market. It's a market of $250 million in Colombia. The market requires more or less around 400 containers of cigarettes every year to fulfill the demand. I mean, that's the supply required to fulfill the demand of cigarettes. In Colombia, we have approximately 35% of the cigarettes that are sold in Colombia are from Chinese and Asian companies and are coming from contraband. So how all these containers came inside the country? What we found is that free trade zones are the privilege. I mean, it's the dominant route to bring it into the country. I mean, there's 1/3 that's going to the border with the small vessels or coming from Venezuela. I mean, there's multiple routes, but the big players that are linked with narcotics, with international criminal organizations are using free trade zones. And this has multiple reasons, but I select 3 reasons to share with you. Is the process is really easy, it's fast, it's much faster than doing it the other way, and it has a very low risk. So that's perfect for business. And it's why it's increasing the role of free trade zones in the contraband of tobacco. Second, it also allows to avoid all the health norms and taxes. And I want to be clear for that. It's like the legislation in Colombia and most of the free trade zones in the region is like you can bring tobacco that doesn't fulfill the health restrictions of what we call here pictograms, warning signals, or conditions. I mean, it's something very silly, but you can bring illegal tobacco to the free trade zones, even if they don't fulfill the health norms. So what is happening is that the criminal organization, they create companies, they make an import, and they justify that they're gonna re-export the product to other countries, even that in those other countries, they don't fulfill the health norms, but we allow them to bring them. And once they get into the free trade zones near the market, near the bigger markets like Bogota, Barranquilla, or Cali, these cigarettes disappear in those free trade zones. And finally, it's very, very hard to know who is the final owner of those containers. We have multiple cases of containers that the authorities, with the cooperation of the US authorities and the Colombian police, found containers, and it has passed 1, 2, 3 years, and we don't know who are the real owners, because the fachet companies they create with fake information, they just do it in a very easy way. So if we can change now to the next one. I want to share some, to end my presentation, I have a very short time. I want to share some numbers about how the commerce of tobacco looks like in the free trade zones in Latin America. This is something crucial, is that it's decreasing the amount of tobacco that is legally declared in the free trade zone. So we have a reduction between the last 2 years of 30%. So, I mean, as anybody knows in the tobacco industry, the demand is very, very stable. It's not like liquor, or it's not like other products or other commodity that change depending on the season or change depending on price or whatever. Tobacco is very, very stable. So having this huge reduction, what is indicating our main complaint, or our main doubt, is that pretty much they are using other ways to use the free trade zones rather and not declaring tobacco as it really is. So this is I want you to focus, this is a reduction in the declaration, it's not a reduction in the commerce of tobacco in free trade zones. The next one, please. And it's also visible, not only the last graph was in the number of shipments, but if we follow the total weight or the value that they declare, we also see a dramatic decrease in them. So this is telling us that as a result, and that's my hypothesis, as a result of the role that the US, the Custom Border and Protection Office, and what the authorities are doing, they are trying to hide the tobacco in the way they are moving in the free trade zone. The next one, please. If we see the full picture of the country and how free trade zones are using to move tobacco, what we will see is something that it's, I mean, I have a question here rather than an answer, is that Indonesia is the biggest port of origin of tobacco. And Indonesian tobacco companies are not that big. I mean, Korean, Chinese companies are much more important. So pretty much our question is why Indonesia is so important as a port of origin rather than South Korea. And what we have seen, observed in Colombia and most of the countries in the region is that South Korean companies as KTG are the leading companies in the market for illegal tobacco. So this is something that is not, I mean, we were expecting that China or India or especially South Korea has a bigger role as a port of origin. So we don't know how the tobacco gets into Indonesia, or what is coming before, or is not really the origin. It's just like intermediary in the process. The next one, please. This is also using the information. It's like the free trade zones. It is the destination, the receiving port, the final destination. And just want to highlight that Colombia, it remains be as a very important port of destination, is the biggest destination of tobacco in Latin America. Colombia is a small market for tobacco compared with Brazil, Mexico, or other countries that has a higher number of population. But it's just indicating that Colombia remains, I mean, the free trade zones of Colombia are very, very important for the international market. The next one, please. And I just want to share just some information about one special case that we have been following a lot is, as I mentioned, the companies or the products, the brands that are leading the market in Colombia are brands from KTG, that is a Korean company. It's a public company. You can get access of that information. And we have followed what is happening in the market. So it's an inconsistency is that KTG is reducing the amount of tobacco that is declared in free trade zones to bring it into Colombia, but at the same time they are increasing the participation in the market. So it's something that doesn't make sense. If this this contraband that is observed, it should be reflected in the commerce of the free trade zone. So what we believe, following the number of shipments and weight, is that they are using other methods to hide the real component of what is inside each container. If we can move to the next one, please. And this is very, I'm sorry. And this is very, very difficult to track. I mean, it's KTG as a company, it doesn't have only one company. I just put this example. If also, these are all the subsidiary companies they use in the United States to import the product. Some of them are owned by them, some of them are partners. And so trying to build and create a picture of how the KTG operation is occurring in the free trade zone, it's something very, very complex. We have spent a lot of time and we have a clear idea now how it works, but I just want to share with you some this part to say that this is not like so simple that just to check a couple of data. Is in order to understand how the contraband of this specific product of the brands of this company are coming into the region of Latin America. It's very complex, but we have full confidence that free trade zones is in the middle of the process. And finally, my last presentation, I think I'm 1 minute late. It's like, I want to share 3 conclusions. Free trade zones are the main route for contraband in Colombia and Latin America. This not only include tobacco, it also includes all type of products. Especially, I was really surprised with the size of the market of medicines. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry, the relation between contraband and counterfeiting is very, very important in free trade zones. The second is the United States ports and the free trade zones in the United States have become crucial steps in this smuggling. This is new. This wasn't not happening in the past. This is the role of the U.S. It's something that it just it brings a lot of alerts in how the system of controls are occurring. And finally, KT&E products produce the tobacco that dominates the illegal market in the country. And the multiple and strange trends are observable in its international commerce. So if we want to focus on tobacco, we have to have a conversation about KT&E, that is a public company, and probably, and I'm pretty sure it can be suitable, can bring to court by countries that are reducing the taxes and different conditions. So this is our things that I can share today. And I hope if you have any question, I would be happy to answer right now, or if you want to share some context on that, I will be studying free trade zones and contraband for a long time, I expect. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we receive questions right now. We just wait for the end, or just let me know.
Thank you, Daniel. We will wait until the end to get all the questions and answers. But Perfect. Thank you for this very detailed case studies where we can clearly see the complexity of the problem and the scale, right? It's not just a local problem, but it's truly a global phenomenon. And I will now move on to our last presenter, Dr. Christian Viana de Azevedo, who will discuss the crime-terror nexus in the tri-border area, but also focus on how the flows move from South America to Africa and beyond. So Christian, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Dr. George, and thank you for George Mason's track for inviting me for this panel of very interesting, talking about hubs of illicit trade. And as George has said, I'm going to discuss 2 different issues. The first one is a focus on a hub of illicit trade, which is the tri-border area between Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. And the other one is the illicit flows of cocaine from South America through Africa and beyond. And I'm going to begin through the tri-border area, something that Dr. Rashmi has already touched in her presentation. And tri-border area is located in this southern part of South America called the Southern Cone. It's like Rashmi said, it's basically, there are 2 bridges that connect those 3 countries. And we have a population of about nearly 1 million people that live around that area. It's a very porous border, poorly controlled. You have seen that the bridge holds like nearly 90,000 people crossing per day. We see all types of crimes, all types of transnational criminal organizations. They have set up their structures there. And this area, since late 80s, terrorist groups, they have taken advantage of this unregulated space in order to move their facilitation schemes. Next, please. This is a picture of the Friendship Bridge, and in this area we can see not only a conurbation of 3 different towns, but also there is a large swath of tropical jungle, rivers and lakes, which makes it a perfect terrain for people to move across countries and hide themselves easily. And this area became known after, in the beginning of the 90s, after those attacks conducted by Hezbollah in Argentina, in Buenos Aires in 1992 and 1994, which in the subsequent investigation conducted by Argentinian authorities, they have found out that most of the facilitation, the pre-attack planning, logistics, recruiting and financing, and also post-attack like evasion were done through the tri-border area. In different places within the tri-border area, were basically in the vicinities of the cities of Foz do Iguaçu, Ciudad del Este, and Puerto Iguaçu. So after this, the mid-90s, this area was already known. We have also seen Al-Qaeda operatives that went through this area in order to garner support from the local population and to try to finance themselves for the future attacks that were conducted in U.S. embassies in East Africa in 1998. Nowadays, we can say that TBA has been dubbed as the criminal fusion center, where the corrupt politicians meet with criminals from all over the world. Next, please. Well, a case in point here that I'm gonna focus on is how Hezbollah operates in the tri-border area. They have been there ever since late 80s, and after by the time of the Lebanese civil war, more than 1 million Lebanese have migrated to South America, and among them, Hezbollah has embedded some of his operatives. And these Lebanese communities were growing very quickly, and Hezbollah was able to embed them through offering a myriad of sponsorships in education, cultural activities, and also religious activities. Some of its members, they became very known, like Assad Barakat and Farouk Omairi, who took part in the plot for the 1992 bombing and 1994 bombing. Ever since, they have created a number of different criminal enterprises, including drug trafficking, arms trafficking, human smuggling, contraband, money laundering, tax evasion, among many others. Next. Farouk Abdul Omairi, he is one of the best known Hezbollah members in the TBA. He used to have personal connections with the Iranian diplomat Mohsen Rabbani, indicted in the Amia bombing case. His business is tourism agencies, but behind their tourism agency, underneath the legal businesses, lies a whole lot of facilitation for terrorism and money laundering and the like. He's considered one of the key financiers in this part of South America. And in 2006, Omairi and 2 of his sons were target of Brazilian Federal Police for transnational cocaine smuggling, trafficking, and they were all sentenced. So Omairi and one of his sons, the older son, they served their sentences in Brazil. And once his sentences were over, Omairi went back to Paraguay, where he allegedly lives and also keeps his tourism agency business. Next, please. Here in this infographic, it's a little bit of what Omairi used to do. So in the past, he was the owner of Piloto Turismo, who was a company involved in the Amia bombings of 1994, because it was a hub for facilitation for counterfeit documents, passports, all the travel plans that the plotters they conducted through Piloto Turismo, in which Omairi was a co-owner. Also, Mohammed Youssef Abdallah, another Hezbollah member, was an owner, and Assad Ahmad Barakat was one of their partners. And after the bombing and the investigation that followed, this Piloto Turismo agency was extinct, and then Omairi has again build up a network of tourism agencies, in which he's not an owner anymore. He's like a hidden owner, hidden investor. So his name is nowhere. He's just behind the whole business. And he still deals with drug trafficking and all other illicit activities. Next. This other guy here is Assad Ahmad Barakat, one also of the key Hezbollah members that operate in the area. He used to be, in the beginning of the 90s, Hassan Nasrallah's personal and special envoy to the region. He also ran an important funding cell in the tri-border area. His crimes are forgery, extortion, money laundering, and he has been arrested twice in Brazil and extradited to Paraguay to serve sentences. The last of his sentences, they are not connected to terrorism, but they're connected to the first one for tax evasion and the second one for identity theft. But both crimes were facilitation crimes that enabled terrorist activities linked to financing. And he served his sentence in part in Brazil, part in Paraguay. In 2021, he was released from prison and he was deported back to Brazil. So he lost his fake Paraguayan citizenship. Barakat is also being prosecuted in Argentina for money laundering. He and his whole band, his whole clan. And this process is still ongoing with a lot of hard evidence on his crimes on money laundering. Next one, please. So here's pretty much a timeline of Barakat's coming to South America and his activities since 1985 through 2021. And he still is one of the key Hezbollah's members and key Hezbollah figures in the area with connections in the three countries. Next. So Hezbollah and the TBA in South America, some final remarks. Their networks are everywhere around the world. So their networks in tri-border area, they do connect with what they have in West Africa, also in Europe and United States, as far as we know. And also the networks within South America, they are very well connected. So they have a presence not only in TBA, but also in Margarita Island in Venezuela, another strong presence in Maicao in the border with Colombia and Venezuela, and a presence in northern Chile as well, and in Peru. All these networks, they are interconnected. And considering that the Hezbollah has also partnered with Brazilian criminal organizations, and they have come up with new and sophisticated transnational criminal enterprises, it's been more and more difficult to track them down. Their activities, they foster a lot of crime, corruption, and violence in the tri-border area and beyond. So Hezbollah has become responsible for undermining social stabilization and local governance in TBA and other areas within South America. You can see through open sources, there are a lot of news about Hezbollah's partnerships with the other criminal organizations in Brazil and beyond. Also, Hezbollah's leadership, they perceive not only TBA, but also South America as a safe place for them for financing, facilitation, logistics, and recruiting. They have a lot of contact with them in Paraguay. They have established important networks and important liaised with the local actors. The same in Brazil, they act below the radar and they make alliances with local criminal organizations and transnational ones. And in Argentina, they have been running more and more money laundering activities, contraband, and also drugs. Next one, please. Well, now I'm going to touch the nexus in drug trafficking, including Africa. So in the next 4 years, I have seen a growing, increasing quantity of cocaine being trafficked towards Europe, especially, but Middle East and beyond through West Africa. So in the last 4 years, the numbers of in seizures in Africa, they have been growing very much, and the seizures in Brazil destined to Africa and in Argentina, they have also grown very much. So these local criminal organizations, not local, but South American criminal organizations, they have been partnering with some terrorist structures in Africa. And they partnered in tactical collaboration in which they pay a tax for protection, or they pay the transnational terrorist organizations to move their cocaine back and forth. Next one, please. This is a map by UNODC about the main routes of cocaine trafficking through West and Northern Africa. And the drugs, they usually get to these points in the coastal countries, and they are moved to Northern Africa, usually overland, or they go over the sea to the Canary Islands and Spain and Portugal and beyond through fishing vessels mainly. Next. So if you see the terrorist organization's presence, their territorial presence, we can see in those red ellipses, it's pretty much where the terrorist groups are: Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS affiliated groups, and others. But in the larger blue ellipse, it's the range of action of their terrorist facilitators. Because when these drugs, for instance, they land in a coastal country, in Mauritania, in Morocco, in Senegal, in Guinea-Bissau, the terrorist facilitators, they move to these areas to meet the South American drug traffickers, and they organize the transport, the storage, and whatever they need through the territories they control or the territories in which they have influence. So what's the point of this map is to show that the terrorist facilitators' range goes well beyond the terrorist group's location, physical locations. Next. So the cocaine trafficking and nexus to terrorism. So groups in South America, they have been using not only cargo ships, container ships, and commercial flights to move their cocaine into West Africa, but also a lot of investigations of ours, we have found that they have been using submarines, narco submarines, to cross the Atlantic. Also, twin-engine airplanes to cross the Atlantic onto the desert, in which they generally abandon those ships there, they abandon those submarines there, and they move the cocaine onwards, given that the price of a submarine on an airplane is just a very small fraction of the profit that they gain through the cocaine smuggling there. So investigations they have made us to come to conclusions that not only Brazilian organizations, but also Colombian and Venezuelan drug trafficking organizations, they use sometimes the services of groups like Kim, Boko Haram, ISWAP, and Lebanese Hezbollah to trade drugs in West Africa. And nowadays we have been seeing also the growing presence of Brazilian PCC in Africa and in connection with the local groups. Next. Brazilian PCC is the largest criminal organization within Brazil. They are around 35,000 members. They have first expanded through different countries in South America, especially the cocaine producing countries of Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, because they wanted to have an upper hand on the producing countries. And then they expanded to Central America, especially to El Salvador, so they can partner with MS-13 and Mara 18 in order to traffic drugs into the US. From this perspective, also, they have expanded into the prison systems in Spain, where now they have more than 150 people baptized by them in the prison systems in Spain. And from there, they connect with other people in Africa. From Nigeria, they have also a presence because they are basically a prison gang. They were born in a prison system in Brazil, and they have connected to the Nigerian mafia in Brazil and were able to make their bridge to Africa. And in Mozambique, they have a very large operation nowadays. Next. The operation that a PCC then they have those routes, and they bring those the cocaine shipments from the neighboring countries by air or by land, and they have control of some of the operations in some parts of Brazil from which they can export. Next. And they also have partnerships with organizations in different continents. So recently, 2 years back, we have found that they were establishing a very strong network in Mozambique, from which they would operate a counterintuitive trafficking route through the Red Sea onto Europe in order to avoid the ports controlled by Italian mafia. So we have discovered this 2 years back, and we have seen that they have been moving cocaine there from 2016 through 2019, basically hidden in tiles and ceramic and other goods. Next. So finally, my final remarks on this is we have to consider that the increase of cocaine traffic is, as well as terrorist activities in the African continent in the last 4 years, the nexus between them, they tend to increase. A lot of terrorism activities, Islamist-based terrorism activity from the Middle East were moved into Northern Africa and the Sahel, and then so as the drug trafficking from South America. South American traffickers are expanding their presence in the African continent, and they have been investing also a lot of money in the African continent, especially in real estate. So there is a need for more cooperation and coordination between South American countries and African ones. So we see very little coordination, cooperation between, on both sides of the Atlantic. And I can say also that I have seen researching this topic extensively that the nexus between crime and terror in Africa remains still an under-researched topic. Well, that's what I had for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azevedo. It was a very good presentation. It talks a lot of the previous presentations on the complexity of the problem, how it expands, how the roots are, they flow and they change depending on a series of factors. We are more or less short on time. I'll move on to the Q&A session. I hope I can answer all the questions, but if you have any questions that you didn't put up, or if anyone did not get a question answered, I just would like to remember you all that you can connect us directly via email or the chat, and we will try to respond afterwards. Also, remind everybody that the recording and the slides of this event will be posted on the trackgmu.edu website. Well, I will take rounds of 2 to 3 questions and pass on to you. So first question, did you find any link between waste trafficking and money laundering, corruption, organized crime in the region? Another question is, can you expand on the data collection? How did you build on existing research to confirm or disagree with existing knowledge around the world? And another question is, can you expand on how e-hawala techniques? I understand that there were cases in India this year linking extortion groups to individuals in Dubai. These are all very good questions. So feel free to jump in and answer the questions as you wish.
Yeah, I would like to start with our methods. So we use mixed methods and we use original data and data from secondary sources. And we use triangulation of data to verify our findings from different sources. So original data we receive from our interviews with the law enforcement officers, with the subject matter experts, with industry representatives. However, all data we receive from interviews, we verify through different sources from ongoing investigations, from past investigations by national law enforcement agencies, by regional organizations and international organizations, such as, for example, the United Nations Security Council investigations. And we follow these investigations. For example, if we find some manufacturers of illicit goods in UN investigations, then we can trace their location, we can receive more data. We also use databases available on the trades, such as United Nations Comtrade databases, and we use available software programs such as Sanjeeva to trace, for example, beneficial owners. And all the sources we use to confirm our data. And related to the e-hawala scheme, thank you very much. This is a very interesting question. And it has historical roots because during the Gulf boom in the 1980s, when many Indians, especially from southern states in India, such as Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, they migrated to Dubai and other countries in that region. They didn't have access to formal banking. And so to send remittances to their homes, they used hawala, which was based also on gold smuggling. However, nowadays, when they have access to formal banking, they started to using innovative methods such as e-hawala. And e-hawala, for example, my example in my presentation was based on the 2018 case when Indian police detained 54 smugglers of gold who transported who hired carriers who transported bank cards to Dubai. So nowadays they use formal banking to support the circulation of gold and money between Dubai and Mumbai. However, it's not a separate case. We can see a pattern. And they, in this particular case, they transported, each carrier transported about 5 bank cards, each of them containing about $1 million. However, these cases are repetitive and we can see a pattern. Thank you.
I can just add a couple of things on both the data question and also the waste question. Julia, absolutely, everything that Julia has said holds true. I think the emphasis here is that the contribution of the project is essentially amalgamating information, verifying that information, and actually trying to point out what are the elements of transnationality and convergence that are occurring across multiple hubs. And that is not necessarily addressed very clearly in the literature. There is an acknowledgement that there is this element of transnational flow, but it's not really addressed. And so I think what the project is really trying to plug in terms of its data methodology is pulling the information from multiple sources, primary, secondary, qualitative, quantitative, and then essentially putting that together into an overall analysis, and especially using non-English sources. I think that's also very, very important to put in here, because that, we're using quite a lot of languages to pull this together. In terms of the question around waste, that's a really, really interesting question. As far as I am aware, I have information on waste trafficking coming into Brazil, but not necessarily linked into the tri-border area. There's also some information that we have in terms of Bolivia and Paraguay exporting waste, but again, it's not necessarily linked to the tri-border area, at least till this point that I've done the research. It might be something that we discover as this moves forward, because we are still in the process of pulling the data together. So that's me.
Well, Christian, Daniel, would you like to add anything, or should we move on to the next questions?
For my part, George, we could move on.
All right. We have some more good questions here. One is asking particularly to the Brazil TBA, are there or there appear to be any policy changes to address any of these issues from the new administration? Remember that Brazil has just gone through presidential elections. But we also have a couple of comments here that I think would be nice to explore. Anna Sergi said that as an expert of the NADRETA, I would like to challenge the word control, but I would encourage more research on the NADRETA brokers work with the PCC. So maybe you guys could comment a little bit on that. There is also a comment that the UNODC will soon publish a global report on cocaine markets. That's definitely something that we all should keep an eye on. Thank you for the tip. And also another question is, if we have any evidences connecting the PCC to contraband of cigarettes in the South American region?
All right, George, I can comment something about all these. Can I?
We'll fight about it.
Well, as for the new administration, from my perspective, I haven't seen anything concrete about it, because it's the new administration, they just have come up with their elements that they want to challenge, to start working with. And by the way, as for public security and intelligence, they will have the first meeting, the first more concrete meeting this week. So it's going to be tomorrow and Friday, the first two meetings about how to address crime in Brazil in general. But one thing that I can tell you is that the first thing that is coming to this agenda is how to reduce the overall violence numbers in Brazil, not necessarily transnational crime. Transnational crime is not on the top of the agenda, and it hasn't been actually. So a reduction of violence is the first topic. But well, if we touch violence, and that's what this new people that were invited to take part in this group, they will bring the transnational organized crime, because they are, some of them, of course, are drivers of this whole violence, including groups that I did not mention. PCC is not the only one, but we have Comando Vermelho and others that in Rio, for instance, they are a criminal insurgency. And as a criminal insurgency, a topic that our participant here, John Sullivan, knows very well, he coined the term, and it's very much rooted in Rio de Janeiro, and they have connections in different parts of the world. So PCC is not the only one, and the criminal insurgency Rio is one of the top drivers of violence overall in the country, not only Rio, but beyond. As for unnecessarily, thank you for your comment. You are right. Control is a strong word for Drangheta and the ports. But what happens with PCC, as far as I have investigated, because I have been dealing with this topic as a federal agent for nearly, well, most part of my 21-year career. And I have served in different places in Brazil and overseas. And what I see is that PCC is trying to find ways to dodge Albanese mafia and Drangheta in Europe. So PCC can establish itself as a broker within Europe and not being an intermediate like PCC already is. So what you said about the research on this would be very welcoming if we had more research on this, because PCC, for instance, they broke with different Drangheta personnel. As we have seen in open source recently, the father and son Assisi, that they were arrested 2 years back, they were part of a team that used to broker with PCC, but not only them, there are more than a few of others. And also some third parties linked to Drangheta that operate on behalf of Drangheta in Brazil with PCC and the Comando Vermelho. So it's really a web of people that are linked with PCC in order to help Drangheta. And well, I could see that you wrote about it. Well, if we had the chance, anytime, I'd love to discuss this with you, because, you know, Rashmi and George knows I'm very passionate about this topic. The three of us are, right, Rashmi and George? And so that would be very welcoming. And well, what I can say that it has been also hard evidence on this is that PCC has been involved increasingly in cigarette smuggling from Paraguay to Brazil, because in Brazil, more than half of the market of the cigarette market is smuggled cigarette. A few weeks back, I was talking with some people that are involved from the private sector in also raising more information about this. And they have been saying that they have found, the private sector has found evidence of PCC also diversifying their portfolio. So nowadays, cocaine trafficking, it could be said that it represents 80% of PCC's involvement, of PCC's profits, revenue. And this has been decreasing. It's been decreasing because PCC has basically turned to other two types of crime. One of them is cigarette smuggling from Paraguay to Brazil. They have been gaining a lot of money out of this. Another one is bank fraud, but cybercrime, cyber bank fraud. They have been also diversifying. Not only they see that in banks, it's dangerous, and it's you know, they get caught eventually, and the trafficking cocaine also. So there's a cell, a PCC cell that is specializing in electronic bank fraud, and that they have been very successful. So this is other under-researched topic within Brazil, and you can get all of this data, especially from the private sector. So, and I'm highlighting the private sector here because I do not see any future of us fighting this TOC without both the academia and the private sector to board this fight with us. So academia and the private sector, they are absolutely key actors in fighting these illicit hubs. Thank you. Sorry for taking too long.
No, it was great. Anyone else would like to make a comment on these questions, on these points? Okay, well, we still have around 10 minutes. So what I'll do, I'll give about 2 minutes for each of you to make your final remarks. So Dr. Rashmi Singh.
Okay, I'm just looking at some of the questions here, and it would be nice. Okay, hang on. Thank you, Axel. I'm just looking at some of the questions that we have on our chat here and see if I can contribute to this. I think the question about what really individuals can do about terrorism, illicit trade is one of the questions that I would like to touch upon, because I think this is where Christian just left off, you know, the role of the academy, the role of the private sector, the role of civil society. All of these, we need to pull all elements together with the government and the police in order to actually meet this very, very dynamic, consistently changing threat. And I think the role of the individual cannot be understated in this, because it is the individual and the structural constraints that individuals face in these particular hubs, whether these are in terms of financial constraints, are in terms of educational constraints, are in terms of opportunity constraints. All of these, I think, are factors that we need to address in the long term. We cannot have short-term policies with the expectation that we're going to see major shifts. And we also have to remember that this is a threat that is consistently changing and evolving. One of the things that we have seen consistently in all our hubs is that when any criminal organization, when any terrorist organization realizes that the government or any countermeasures are catching up to what they are doing, they're very, very quick in order to change either the geographical focus, the kind of modus operandi that they are utilizing, and they're very good to mutate. And I think in order to actually respond to that, we need to have a much more holistic counter response that takes the individual into consideration. We need informants on the ground. We need participants on the ground, and they will not ever be present unless and until we can actually sell this to them as something that is beneficial to them and the generations that they and the communities that they belong to in the long term, in the long run, and something that is beneficial to them and that we can offer more to them than a criminal organization or a terrorist organization can at that particular given moment in time. So I think this is where I would end with that. It's a very abstract answer, I understand, but there is no one set policy that we can follow. It has to be a holistic measure. And there are very, very severe challenges and limitations to that, at least at this point. Transnational and international cooperation and dialogue are already one way forward. But as Christian has said, often what happens is these are not necessarily the priorities for governments given their very specific temporal mandates. So challenges, but we need to articulate that before we can move forward. So I let it go at that.
Thank you very much. That's great. Actually, following up on Christian's and Rashmi's point. One of the questions that was raised as well is exactly about what we as individuals can do to help address this problem. So this maybe can be a point for Dr. Yulia, Christian, and Daniel to finish up. So Dr. Krylova, if you would like to make your final remarks.
Yeah, thank you, George. As my final remarks, I would like to underscore the importance of international cooperation and international coordination to fight illicit trades. This is why I like this project, because we are all international. We have researchers located in different continents who work together to fight illicit trades in different hubs. And I started my presentation with a sanctions evasion scheme that involved over 34 entities located in 11 countries. So we understand that it's very complicated schemes, and they rely on multiple front and shell companies that are registered and located in different parts of the world. And there are many interjurisdictional issues. There are also new challenges. For example, we discussed today e-Havala scheme. We also need to discuss virtual assets because, for example, Dubai is becoming a hub for for virtual assets, for cryptocurrency, and there are new challenges related to that. So I think that we need to underscore the importance of international cooperations, and it does not involve only law enforcement agencies. It involves also private sector agencies. It involves our researchers, like our research project, who work together to solve our joint problems and issues and to solve these challenging issues related to illicit trades and the interconnectedness between different hubs of illicit trades. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel?
Hi, Tool. Yes, I mean, I just want to say something about how to approach the problem. And I believe that a big mistake is we are seeing that the solution is to put everybody in prison. I mean, that we have to track this organization and make justice, and that's some big mistakes. I mean, we should, but it will take too much time and it will have a limited impact because, I mean, organizations move. I mean, you take one head here, then there will be another capo and another drug dealer, or it doesn't matter the market. It's not the correct rationality. We of course, we need to improve our judicial system and the law enforcement. But what is crucial and what it's more need, and actually I think is the most important strategy is to have administrative norms and change the normative spectrum where contraband occurs. I mean, what I try to highlight most of the time is like 95% of the smuggling of tobacco is legal. I mean, it's just the final destination that is turned into a legal component is very different from narcotics. Any point in the supply chain of narcotics, the cocaine, the supplies, the money is illegal, but it's not the same in contraband. So we really need to have need a discussion about the norms and how we deal with this, because we really need that the free trade zones became more clean, transparent in the way they move and they use. But from our experience, most of what they did it because it's legal to do it. I mean, we know by the names and we know the routes, and we know that they bring containers full of tobacco from China. We can put the police on it, but it's not illegal. I mean, they are allowed to do it because the norms allow it. Then they will disappear the tobacco later. But we really need to focus on the administrative norms and the legislation in order to create some level of different levels of contention of this phenomenon. So that's the most, I would say that that's the most urgent discussion. It's just we need to change the norms, not only trying to put everybody in prison. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Christian?
Well, thank you, George. What I think of all of this is that, well, we have to cooperate. That's an obvious thing, and it's been told millions of times. In order to cooperate, what I see is that we have to know each other better. Government, academia, civil society, private sector. If we do not know each other, it's going to be hard to cooperate. If we do not see something as a convergence point of a threat assessment, it's hard to make things move. And I think one of the things that we can do to foster this more of knowing each other is through research. So research is the base of the touching ground of all these activities. For instance, talking to our African counterparts, they do not know what happens in South America as for cocaine. But well, we do not know either what happens in Africa as for cocaine trade. So if we had more research on these topics, if we knew each other better, we would know in which terms we could actually cooperate more efficiently. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank you both, our participants and our guests, for this brilliant and very thoughtful, provoking webinar. And I would like now to pass on to Louise for the final words.
Thank you for this outstanding presentation. And I want to thank Dr. Christian Viana de Acevedo, Daniel Rico, Dr. Rashmi Singh, Dr. Krylyova, and Dr. Lashmar for this presentation and for this research that I've been reading, but as I heard it orally, I was absolutely fascinated by hearing it all together. And then I want to thank some colleagues at TRAC behind the scenes who assumed such an important role in bringing us to this day. That includes Judy Dean, Casey Kennard, and David Luna, who are part of our analytical team, our coordination team, and the heart and soul of TRAC in moving this project forward. And I also want to thank all of you as an audience who have been so engaged, who have joined us from around the world, and who have such absolutely fascinating backgrounds. And as Christian was just talking about how we need all of these different people to collaborate, it's absolutely key that we have the kind of audience that we had today, that represented people from academia, business, civil society, government from around the world. And so that is what TRAC is proud to serve as a convener to this diverse community. So thank you so much, and tell your friends who want to hear more about it, because we'll be putting this webinar and PowerPoints up on our website. And so people who missed it the first time can catch it. But we had an audience of about 100 today, and we're thrilled to have had you and look forward to your presence at future seminars. So thank you.